Hi, how are you?
um, my name is Hilly. I'm a producer, podcaster, the chair of the committee of writers at the Writers Guild. We're out here doing things. So I welcome everybody to Future X Channel, develop animated show A to Z with the writer, producer himself, Will Case and Williams. Welcome to you too.
Hello.
Hello. I'm having a little trouble hearing. Can everybody hear just fine?
Yeah, it's distorted for sure.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll sound. Anyway, so the AFROCOMICCON 2020, we want to thank you all for just to say this little deal at the beginning. So consider donating to the AFROCOMICCON Junior program that funds young of color to go through a 12-month program. They will learn tech skills, innovation, product development, and entrepreneurship. Please donation, any amount will help. More information will be on the website. So that, go ahead and jump right into the show. Welcome, Yul. Well, how you guys doing?
Good. As good as we can
doing
be.
Well. Yeah.
It's always the answer, right?
Yes. Given the circumstances. Just want to make sure, because you're stuttering a little bit on my end. I'm not sure if it's mine or.
I'm getting that also, but I can sort of dope out what's being said. So.
Okay. Oh, he froze.
Hilliard, I think he's a little frozen. At least on my end. I don't know how we want to start this, Yul.
Yeah, it's a little frozen on my end. Well, I guess we'll just jump in and say a hello. Maya and I have known each other for, I guess, the better part of our lives, right?
Yeah. Well, why don't you introduce yourself? I'll introduce myself, and then we can talk about how this idea came.
Okay. Well, because they're saying that Hilliard needs to log out and re-log back in. Okay. Shall we let him do that, or shall we just jump right in?
Well, why don't you go through your credits?
Okay.
And my
well,
thank you for keeping it going. I got jumped off.
Okay. Well, we'll let you take it away. I was just going to introduce myself and.
I was literally going to say, why don't you guys tell us how you guys both got into the game, where you're from, and how you got into the game?
Okay. Well, I'm from the Bay, born and raised in the Bay Area, born and raised in Berkeley, but lived in Oakland, San Francisco, and the whole nine. And really, I came out of theater. And so I was at American Conservatory Theater as a child. I was on a TV show as a child called Up and Coming. And that was really my kind of introduction to the Hollywood game, because as a very young person, I had the chance to work with some real greats, like, everybody from Brock Peters to Esther Roll to Lawrence Fishburne to, so we all knew. I was the little kid back in the day that knew all these adults, and Lathan as a director. And then I had the good fortune to end up, I don't know how, I had my kind of Berkeley hippie-ish upbringing, kind of raised in the shadow of the Black Panther Party. And then I ended up back going to school, I don't know how, at Harvard. But one of the people that I always had admired and was following along was Miss Maya Williams. So
one of the real OGs,
Yeah. And our families were familiar with each other, being Black families, I guess, sending their kids ended up at Harvard from the Bay.
We went to the same church.
Oh my God!
Church by the side of the road.
Church by the side of the road.
That's what it's called. That's hilarious. I love it.
And that is how. And then really, I've always been just not only a friend but a fan. and seeing Maya really trailblazing in lots of ways. And one of those was even at the Harvard Lampoon when she was the vice president while Conan O'Brien was the president. And it was just so nice to see a strong Black woman in a position of power, comedy, doing her thing. And all these years, we've, both had been fortunate to have successful careers in Hollywood, and she came out here, and I'll let her tell her side of it. But we had never actually worked together after knowing each other all this time, and we were both at stages in our career where we were just really like, we know what it's like not to have a good experience coming up with an idea, developing something and then seeing it get turned into something that you don't particularly, it doesn't end up what you really want it to be. And my company was kind of developed out of a reaction to that behind the billboards, which is we do international TV development, or we do TV development and international co-production. So
we'll get into that for sure. We'll get into that for sure.
But that's that's how we came together.
That's nice. So, let me jump into Maya. How did you get to Harvard? What was your?
Well, you already told half my story.
He did.
I wasn't born in the Bay Area, but I grew up in the Bay Area from like 6th grade on, and I went to Berkeley High. That's where I met Ewell. And I always kind of
from Palo Alto.
Oh, cool! All right, so Bay Area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I always kind of considered Ewell a little brother, and I would say that, except that I actually have a little brother who might be offended that I considered Ewell my little brother. But yeah, I was a good student. I expected to go to med school and be a doctor, so I went to Harvard because I studied really hard, and I had a great time. And I was the first Black writer on the Harvard Lampoon. I didn't really know that at the time, but it sort of became clear to me later, and certainly the first Black woman on the Lampoon. And while I was there, I decided I did not want to be a doctor. I just sort of, being away from my parents made me realize that being a doctor was kind of their idea and not my idea. And so I didn't know what I wanted to be, but on the Lampoon, a lot of people were going into writing for television. A lot of them were going to the David Letterman show or Saturday Night Live, and a few had trickled out to Hollywood by then. And at the same time, my sister, who was also a big AFROCOMICCON presence and person. Her name's Robin. She goes by Robin Claire Barnes now. But she wanted to be an actress at the time. So we decided to come out to Hollywood together and be roommates. And, from that point, I wrote a spec script, and I just sort of got into sitcom writing. And most of my experience up to, like the first 10 years of my time out in Hollywood was working on sitcoms. So I was on Rock and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and
well, let me just interrupt you and ask you really quickly. How did you get your first break? The reason I ask is on my own podcast, Screenwriters Rent Room, I always interview a lot of showrunners and big EPs, and people go, "Oh, then I moved to LA and I got an agent." I'm like, and then I got on the show. I'm like, motherfucker, how?
Well, I mean, the thing is, everyone gets in. Number one, I had a good spec script. So I want to say, I did actually do something other than just have luck. But I was actually very lucky because when I moved out, before I had an apartment, I was sleeping on this couch of two friends who were Harvard friends who were in the entertainment industry, but not writers. They're both on executives. And I was sleeping on the couch, and one of them happened to be working, in an office with someone who just lost his assistant. And this was a Black woman. She was a year ahead of me. And he said to her, I want someone like you, Kelly. Like, I want someone just like you. And she said, there happens to be a Black woman from Harvard sleeping on my couch. And so, literally, that's how I got the job, was that I went in and interviewed, he liked me. And so I was working as his assistant. And then he was in comedy development. So I got to meet a lot of people, writers, and read a lot of scripts, and got a lot of experience that way. And then at some point I wrote, a spec script, knowing that that's what you need to do if you want to be a writer. And an agent.
Do you remember what you wrote? What was it?
It was a Family Ties.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, yeah. There was an agent.
Was a hot show.
It was the top show,
Yes.
but an agent was looking she needed more women in her stable. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the spec script. It was like, okay, she needs women. I just like typed something out and sent it. And I didn't get the show that she was trying to place someone on. And in the meantime, I just, I didn't know that she kept sending the script out, but she did. And at some point she called me, and I'd never met her before. I'd never met this agent.
Wow.
She just called me and said, hey, there's a show called Charlie and Company. I don't know if you remember. This is a show that's way back. But Charlie and Company is looking for writers, and they want to see you. So I went in. I was still an assistant at that point. I was in a car that had no air conditioning. I couldn't roll down the window. I was wearing like a Hawaiian shirt. I was really not ready for an interview. But I came in sweaty and hot. Took the interview, and then they liked it. So they liked me. So I was like, cool. But for people who don't know, Charlie and Company was a show that starred Flip Wilson, who was a comedian from the 70s. A lot of people may not even remember him, but he was really big back in the day. And Gladys Knight from Gladys Knight and the Pips. And then Jaleel White, who ended up becoming Urkel later. This is his first show.
He was really little back then.
Yeah. So there was a lot of talent on this show. But the show didn't do that well.
They just did like one season, right? Is that what it is?
One season, yeah.
Okay.
But that was where I began.
You got to work with Flip Wilson. Wow.
I got to work with almost all the famous Black comedians from the 70s, but not on the show they're famous for. So I worked with Red Fox on the Red Fox show. I worked with, but not the original Red Fox, but not the royal family, the one in the middle that no one remembers. And I worked with Robert Guillaume. But not on the famous show he was on. Show no one remembers. Yeah. So there's a few of them. But yeah, so that's how I got into it.
No, but see, I love those stories because, and the reason why I asked, not only because you kind of skipped like how, but because I want writers to know that every single one of us got here differently. You know what I mean? And there's really no way. It's really just about your hustle muscle, and sometimes it's about being prepared. And what I love about the interview you said you had when you came in your Hawaiian shirt and all that stuff is you were being the most you at the moment.
Yeah, I was.
And they saw you, and that's what they love. You know what I mean? And that's what I appreciate. When people do too much, you can tell they're not comfortable in their skin being whatever it is they're trying to be. But see, I think that's why you stood out. They were like, oh, she's just a real person. We can hang with her. You know what I mean?
Right. So. She's a mess. Look at that sweaty woman. Let's let her in. Feel sorry for her.
So this show is this interview, this event is about developing animated show from A to Z. So both of you guys have lots of experience in animation. Let's just talk about and I'm going to be asking you guys some simple questions just so you know, for the listeners who are listening. Let's talk about what is A to Z. How do you start, with an animated show, and what's the difference between animation and live action?
Well, I mean, I would say that animation, the main difference is that you're also dealing with visuals. But as far as coming up with an idea, it's very much the same. Like the development, you still have to come up with a good idea that you want to spend a lot of time with. You're going to have to come up with the world that idea takes place in. And with animation, I mean, we're going to use Future X as sort of an example of what we're talking about, since that's what we're both working on and developing. But, Future X takes place in the future. So that's that world is 2/3 of the show and 2/3 of what we had to really focus on. And it took a lot of time to really dig into that. But other than the world, then you have your characters. So you really have to, again, come up with characters who you want to spend time with, that are different and not derivative of other things you've seen. And that, you really get to know on a level where if someone just asks you any question about them, you have the answer,
Right.
So something better than just the Black version of X,
Right.
And then after that, I mean, eventually you're going to want to write a script. And that's sort of, that's the part that I did up until the point where I found Yule and wanted some input and some, I really wanted his muscle. Like Yule has a lot of contacts, and he also threw behind the billboard.
Well, so do you. But...
Well, I do, but they're different. And you'll sort of see that Yule, I mean, behind the billboards, it has the structure of helping people develop an idea that already exists, and so was sort of an expertise that I felt like I wanted for this project. But it took a lot, and then once I connected with Yule, there was a whole other stage of more deep development and more drafts and more sort of finding what is this idea, what does it want to say, who is it for, and these are all things that I thought of, but Yule and Nick, who is his partner in Behind the Billboards, they really helped me dial down into the real nitty gritty of what it was.
Because Yule sent me last week you all's visual pitch for it, and I got to say I've read hundreds of them in my company, and it's what I love about it and how precise and easy it is. Sometimes you get bogged down in what's being shown and what's being read, and yours is like, here's an image, but here's the thing we're going to say on that, and you're going to learn something about it, and it's all about tone. Like tone starts from the very first thing you guys say in there. The first image you give us to the exposition you give us. It all feels. You know exactly what the show feels like. You know what it looks like, and you know what it sounds like, and you can tell what the script is probably going to be like based on the words you guys wrote. So I'm telling you, it's really well written.
No, good.
Thank you. Thank you.
It took over a year to get there.
I will tell you, just by the way. I don't know. I don't know.
But I mean, just to be clear, it took like over a year to get there. So I was developing this while I had an overall deal at Disney, which does basically children's programming. And this was not a children's programming idea. So I was like, well, I'm not going to pitch this at Disney. But since I have a deal here, I have time to develop this and work on it on my, lunch breaks and whatnot. So that was a big chunk of time that I was working on it. And then with Yule, how long were we working on it, Yule, before we actually thought we were ready to pitch it?
We're coming up on, well, it was better part of a year, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is really kind of something that, that we do, I guess, at Behind the Billboards, is that we are kind of a creator-friendly place, and we've had a lot of deep time in development, and then also both as writers, also knowing what it takes to take an idea from fruition all the way through to execution. Right. And but really, it starts with the concept, and it was such a wonderful concept.
Let's tell everybody. Can we tell everybody what it is?
Yes.
Okay. Please. Actually, it's Future X. The genesis of it sort of came from a variety of things. The first being that I really love science fiction, and I was like raised on Star Trek, and I was a Trekkie. And then also one of my favorite shows is Futurama, which is more current. But what I was noticing with a lot of science fiction shows is that they were all post-apocalyptic. I mean, they were really grim. Like there was the future was terrible.
Yeah.
And I just thought
the future always seems to be terrible for Black people.
Yeah, for everybody. Everything's gone. It's just dust and people killing each other. And so I thought, I'd like to create something that's kind of fun, and I'd also like for it to be about Black people since I'm Black. But I didn't want to do the Black version of Star Trek or the Black version of the Jetsons or something that was just like, it's the same show. We're just going to stick some Black people in there. And so I wanted to do something that was original. And one of the things that I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this are fans of is Afrofuturism, which is something that I've been interested in a long time. And the thing that's really great, the people have a lot of different definitions of it, but if we just use the definition that it's imagining a future where Black people thrive, it's like, Black people thrive. I like that. And thrive is the key word there. And we've all, I know everyone has images of Wakanda now, like in their heads, but a lot of people's versions of Afrofuturism is very African centric, as in, let's go to a time when slavery didn't happen and then we moved forward. But that's not, those aren't my people. I'm not African. I'm Black. I'm an African American. And so I wanted to do, and African Americans have slavery in their past. You can't take that away. And so I thought, well, let's just do something that's a little more speculative and say, what's the future of Black people who, Black people now, the Black people we know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then we decided to kind of ground it in a town that we know. So, or
I love the town. You gotta tell them the town. That's just hilarious.
Well, it was Oakland, but it was renamed Obamaland.
That's hilarious.
There's a lot of that in the show.
How many years in the future are we again?
It's 100 years in the future. Okay. And I mean, I can just sort of read our little description because I brought it up here. But it's 100 years in the future. Climate change has ravaged the earth, sending temperatures and sea levels rising, permanently altering the shape of continents, devastating countries with extreme weather, and exacting a catastrophic blow to the human species. Increased intensity of ultraviolet light from the sun has caused the sixth extinction, wiping out people with too little melanin in their skin to protect them from the harmful radiation. So, Caucasians are gone, and they took racism with them.
And they took racism with them.
Yeah. But this cataclysmic disaster isn't all bad. Actually, for Black people, things are looking up. For the first time in history, events have tilted in a positive direction for dark-skinned people. Black culture now openly informs everything in the USA, the societal constructs, politics, business, the arts, etc. So what does that look like? What has changed? What hasn't changed? How do Black people continue to survive? That's what this series is about. So that's the first paragraph of a sheet that Yul and I made among our many descriptions.
And I love it because it's I pitch a lot, and one of the things that you always get, and you guys know this, you guys are out there too, why now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing about, especially after George Floyd and all these things are going on. It's so current to the way that we think and living in our world. So this is why this needs to be done now.
Now, I know.
You know
I mean, the funny thing is all this was being developed before George Floyd, before those protests. But once that happened, it really—
But timing was everything, right?
Yeah. But it also brought the idea of reimagining,
a future.
A future and institutions that now have structural racism in them. What do they look like without that? So if that parlance became common now. And so I think when we pitch this, people will understand what we mean when we say reimagine. It's not just like using, being creative. It's actually what does the police department look like? Is there a police department? Are there prisons? Yeah. Are there guns? Like, what are the guns for? So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. And I mean, Yul can tell you that when we started developing this.
In 100 years, when they stop being on our back, it's going to allow us to have our powers back. You know that, right?
Yeah. Well,
because I'm going to be flying. I don't know about y'all.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things. It's like, for instance, one of the main characters, Pop, is what, 110 years old, or 103 or 110 years old.
Yeah.
And 40, right?
Yes, exactly. And part of that is because all those stressors that we as Black people deal with are no longer there. So what does that world look like? And that is really something that was incredibly freeing. And it was at first, it's that leap to be able to take that leap as creatives to live in that space and really imagine what that looks like. We also have said in our history, and this is like building a whole history, and this is part of what development is. It's like, well, let's actually build the history of this world. And so there's the next big one, earthquake. If you grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco, you know that we've had earthquakes, right? And we're like, well, if we have the next big earthquake and it's huge and it changes the landscape and it's already in the future X world, that means all of the architecture being designed is by Black people. So what does that look like? What does the landscape of our world look like? And who are those architects that are out there now? And that's even something that we talk about even in our pitch deck inside. So it's really a reimagining of the world, not in a negative exclusionary sense, but like this is imagining a kind of a post-racial, post-racist world.
And I'm glad you brought that up. And sorry to interrupt you, Yul, but it made me think about like when you watch ants and like all those different, shows, movies and whatnot, animation, and they rebuild the world as if the ants live in our world. So I'm not comparing the ants, don't get me wrong. I'm saying you elevated it, so it's like we had to reimagine this world. We now moved into the future, right? Black people have now, I don't want to say taken over. No, we took over. Black people are now in power. We've taken over. We're the ones here. What would we do if we could? Well, we probably would do this. There would be cities that looked more Black.
Yeah. Well, we're also.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we also sort of have a lot of fun with Black tropes and making, gentle ribbing of culture. But like, for instance, the big box store that, everyone shops at is a hair care product store, the size of, Staples or Costco. So, and barber shops and hair salons are like real important places and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things that we just kind of blow up. And, we're trying to sort of walk the line of not doing something ourselves that's just kind of racist, if that makes sense. Just sort of based on a cliche without interrogating it and trying to sort of put some love in it and find the truth of it,
and put our foot in it every once in a while.
And it's the same with characters. Like we came up with a bunch of characters, but we want, like the Simpsons and Futurama, the town is going to end up being filled with characters, some of which are familiar tropes, like the female Black judge and the magical Negro, and these are going to be characters that are in it. But at the same time, you're just going to see a big diversity.
They call them Soft Sue Joe, right?
But Clarence Thomas will be there. So I mean, you'll see that there are all kinds of Black people, not just Huggy Bear and the hustlers.
But one of the things that gave me so much joy is like even thinking about how even cultural institutions are represented. So for us, and you will know this, Hilliard, there was a place that I remembered fondly as a kid going to, the Exploratorium, right? And what does that cultural institution look like 100 years in the future? And so we have in the pilot, we have a lot of fun with that, and that's
it's sort of like what do people in the future think are going to be the future, technology? So it's sort of like taking a second jump. Like if 100 years in the future, what are they going to be thinking is futuristic?
Right.
Yeah. So, and how to have fun with that and poke fun at it, etc. Yeah.
So since we're talking about developing a series from A to Z, so one of the questions I get from emerging writers, we don't call them younger writers anymore. We call them emerging, right?
Okay.
Because that also means older writers who are just starting to write.
Sure.
So disabled writers, people of color, right? So one of the things I get when it comes to animation is people go, well, where do I find somebody? Like one of the first thing you see in your deck is this beautiful, cover with all your main characters in it, right? That shows you the world.
Yes.
So they're like, well, where the hell do I find, how can I afford that? Yada, yada. What are your suggestions for those writers who are creating stuff?
Well, that was a big part of the process, obviously, is coming up with what is there's something that initially started in Maya's head. And so even when you're speaking of stuff back and forth to each other, we at a certain point, we realize that what we're talking about, even if we're agreeing, what is in her head may not be what's in my head, right? Sure. And so one of the things that on purpose that I decided to do, or we decided to do as a company, was source images. Once we felt like we had a really good description of all those characters, I decided to actually, and since we are kind of have a global footprint, I decided to actually source those images not just from the United States. So I reached out to artists, and that's an advantage that we have behind the billboards. I reached out to artists from well, first I was just looking, here, and I called even folks at AFROCOMICCON, and I was like, where are these Black artists? Many who I've met at not at Comic-Con, I've met them at AFROCOMICCON, and I had been going to Comic-Con, the one in San Diego, for a long time since my work on Heroes back in the day, right. And so and been paying attention to things ever since I was involved with the show Recess way back when, So, but I reached out, I would say when it came down to when I was whittling it down, I said I would like to present Maya, or present us in general, with a few very, very different visions of what this could be, or how somebody interprets it. So we had a little bit of a bake-off, as it were, and there's we had sourced artists from, one was from Mexico, one was from, I think, Ukraine, and several here from the United States, and ultimately we chose and went with David Gordon, who had been an artist that had been associated also with Lion Forge, and I am friendly with the folks over at Lion Forge, which is the company that also did Hair Love, but that being able to see visual representations of your world with characters from very, even if it's like, oh, that's not what I want. Sometimes you need to see, and these were all very competent artists, but I think that's incredibly important. Sometimes it's to see a wide range of, this is what I want, this is not what I want. And yes, that could be a very expensive process. Right. But I mean, we do, as I will say, as an advantage as a company, have a great reach into people kind of around the globe, and artists, etc.
This is what I mean when I said Jewel has a lot of contacts.
Yes. One of my other, you're one of my big brothers, but one of my other big brothers is Jeffrey Thorne, and Jeff was the showrunner on the Black Panther Quest.
Yes.
Yeah, and he talks about how when he's trying to develop his own stuff, he'll just go on Twitter and look at like who the artists are coming up and be like, wow, they got some talent. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a lot of money, but hey, dude, I would love for you to do this thing with me. And then he just, they come on and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that I'm always thinking about, is how can you use your resources within, that way. And you can barter that. Or if you don't have money, then they are also creating it with you, whatever the thing is. You know what I mean?
Yes. And I will say that a strong idea, like Maya was coming with, right, like is helpful in that process.
Right.
Because there's lots of people who will want people to, do work for free on something, and they're like, hey, work on my idea. But somebody's like, well, why am I going to spend that time? But if you going out there, and you have, and we felt very strongly that we had developed a very strong idea at its core, then we should be able to attract people that would want to, what we call, come play in the sandbox, or come play in our sandbox.
Yes.
And I did a lot of that myself, even just going through Instagram, artists, people I'd met in the past, reaching out, or just kind of like-minded folks, even, and I would be sourcing it from young friends, or, people that are just like, hey, who's really doing their thing? I just, and that takes time, effort. Honestly, it ends up taking, to do well, or at the level we want to do it, takes some money.
And it also takes, I mean, you have to sort of know a little bit who your audience is and what you want, because a lot of we knew that this wasn't going to be a kid's show. We wanted to be aimed at sort of PG-13 up, so you can get the the tweens.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like it's for grown folks, for sure.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. It is. But I have a thing about ugly animation. So I love animation, but I really like good looking animation. And there's a lot of adult shows where it's really ugly animation. And I just didn't, I wanted these people to look good. I just sort of said Afrofuturism, this has to look good. Like this has to look amazing, not little scratchy characters, you know? So I told that to you.
If this is our future, it's got to be our shot. And we were like, why would we want it looking, you know?
You know, so I wanted to look good, but also not look like it's for kids. So that was actually pretty difficult kind of thing to manage. And then I was, you know, I kept throwing things into the mix that I don't know if it was annoying to you all, but you have to keep telling the artist different things. Like I said, no tiny feet. I said, we need big feet. Because Black people like their shoes and we want to see some nice shoes. So no tiny feet where you can't see what the shoes look like. And also I just don't like tiny feet. So, you know,
and if you notice, Hilliard, a lot of all those comics, the popular ones, I mean, all those animated shows, everybody's running around with these kind of tiny feet, you know. Now, and I see you have shoes over your shoulder, and as Maya will tell you, I've been obsessed.
I'm a sneakerhead.
My first film was called Shoes, so I'm always been obsessed with shoes anyway. And so we were like, so that note resonated, but that's what I'm talking about it's a small note that then really resonates throughout the life of the development, you know? So, and you have to be able to listen and hear for that in your creator, in the person who you're working with, and to know when the gems are the things that you can really follow along. And I mean, that even goes toward developing something. And this speaks to kind of notes in the creative process. It's like, it's knowing when to listen to what and what to hear and what types of things that sometimes can be said casually that have real significance. And I actually, I remember once having a conversation with Lawrence Fishburne. We were talking about an August Wilson.
I call him Fish because that's my favorite.
Yeah, me too. I call him Larry.
I remember when he was Larry, right? And then, you know, we were both living in Venice at one time and had probably spent, you know, loaned money to the same person and both didn't get it back. You know, but Fish could afford it more than I could. I was like, damn, that was a lot of money. You know? But you do what you do for friends. But we were talking about notes, and he had talked about the great Lloyd Richards, who was a famous director who directed a lot of August Wilson shows. And he said, well, what Lloyd could do is give you a note and I wouldn't understand it, but he would drop it. And he said, and it might be a month later, or it might be until the moment before you're doing that thing that the note activates and comes. And so that, in a sense, you'll no tiny feet, right? So in there became something, because it also becomes what we call kind of a point of entry into the story. We're like, oh, well, that's an important thing. Or when we're thinking about that character, when we're seeing that character realize, we're like, well, what is the story with these, you know, with shoes? Or what is the story with the, right. There's avenues there. So
it goes to that. It's totally different, but it goes to like, as you know, I'm doing this Emmett Till thing right now, and there's a moment, at the beginning of the pilot where, as you know, Emmett and his cousins are all out there, and the whistle happens, and I'm going to show up from different points of view, so you're not going to really assume that he actually whistled, by the way. And so what's going to happen is, so the whistle happens, and his cousin Simi looks and sees this will make make sense in a second. And so Carolyn, the one who claims that he whistled and made things at her, literally spins on them, sees him, and Simi, his cousin, sees her go to the car, and it looks like what she's getting is a gun. Right? So he's watching from his point of view. He sees her go toward the car, reach in the back, grab something. All he sees is something shiny. He goes, she got a gun, right? and they start sprinting. And in the parentheses, I write, yes, they all run like black people do whenever one person runs. You get what I'm saying? I don't need to explain it.
Right.
I don't need to explain it. Instead of, why are they all running? This is what we do. If one person runs,
everyone
we all run.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just using it as the same analogy for the shoe thing, the sneaker thing. We have a thing about that, you know, that we would understand that they wouldn't get. So I love that you have.
Well, to show how important it is, in the script, we start on a pair of awesome sneakers.
Nice.
And we see that, you know, Leon is the dad character, the main character, and he's lacing them up. But that's like close up on these amazing shoes, and then he and his wife are getting
the most amazing shoes you've ever seen.
And that's the credit system.
That would be something I have then, for sure.
So you know right away you're in the future, although, you know, shoes right now look pretty futuristic. But
oh God, yes. I have some pretty space-looking sneakers. Yes.
Yeah. Well, wait and see what the future has for you. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
So there are all those stages in terms of development. I mean, and it's really starts with the concept, right? And then, you know, depends on where you are in a script, or telling that story, or realizing that world. And world building is really something that I kind of specialize in, kind of coming out of the whole heroes world, because that's really where I cut my teeth in television, was on the show Heroes, and being partially responsible in that for really expanding and developing all those ancillary worlds. So that's just kind of how my brain thinks. People will call them rabbit holes. But for the creation of worlds, it's really a wonderful thing to be able to do with somebody, and to draw that out. And that's really what, and I think what a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand development, and you can. It's very difficult. Lots of people have an idea, but to really, you know, draw that idea out and really develop it takes time. It's people have titles of that's what they supposedly do, but usually that's not what you're getting to do. You're not having the freedom to do that I mean, even when you have overall deals, you know, Maya can speak to that. You know, we've all been in the situations where we have, you know, had development deals at different places. I've been at, you know, between us, we've been at Disney, FX, I don't know, a bunch of studios or something like that. Sure. Yeah, network stuff. And, you know, I've been on the feature side at places as well. And you're really getting to see the world of it. And sometimes there are some very wonderful creatives out there, but you might not, as African-American creators, traditionally, we haven't really been, I would say, given the attention of really getting what some of those really excellent people can bring to the table.
Well, it's interesting you talk about all these overall deals and all this stuff. We were talking on the Committee of Black Writers the other day about that. There's, and as you guys know, we put out our letter, our Dear Hollywood letter.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that because we did, things have changed, but some things are getting pushed faster. Like we really put a stamp on Hollywood. It really, some shit happened when we did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I noticed is a lot of our friends that all three of us have are getting these overall deals at these huge companies. And what I talk about a lot is I want to see what happens in 2 years, right? Because usually it lasts a year or two, right? So what I want to see is will they keep it? Will they renew it? You know what I mean? Et cetera, like that. Or are they just going, well, let's give them this little $250,000 deal over here and knock that out the way, and we'll just write that off just to show that this company's doing something. You know, I'm like, no, let's see what happens.
I mean, one of the reasons why one of the things that Yul and I talked a lot about when we first connected was, what do we want out of this project? Right. And like Yul said at the beginning of this, we've both been on, you know, shows and projects where it started out as one thing, but then you see it turning into something else based on network notes, basically. And that's happened on a lot of the pilots that I've worked on where, you know, few of them have been my ideas, but they've been but still, you know, there's something I'm excited about, and then it just turns into something else. And so one of the main things that we really wanted to get out of this was we wanted to make this show the way it needed to be made. We didn't want to make it and then have someone give a lot of notes that don't really quite fit what we wanted to do, but let's just do it because we'll get paid for it. Right. Since we both, you know, have long careers in the entertainment industry, we have the luxury of being able to do something out of love and not just for money. So, you know, this is still our plan because we haven't sold it yet, but the idea is to sell it to a place.
I think you will. I'm going to be pushing for this. This is badass.
Well, I mean, we want to sell it to a place that will let us have creative control. Well, number one, that'll do WGA. So let's put a shout out to the WGA.
Yeah, shout out to the WGA.
But also,
will let us,
will let us make the show that we want to make. And a lot of the things in this show might be a little dicey for, you know, frankly, white executives. And we're fortunate that right now there is a little window where all executives, white executives and others, are looking for Black content, and they're seeing the success of Atlanta and you know, just other Insecure, and you know, these other shows that are Black, that's seen through a Black lens,
right,
for an audience that can understand it, and not writing down or writing in a way that like, hey, white people, we're going to explain some things to you. It's just, no, this is what it is. And that's really what we wanted it to be. We don't want to be explaining Black culture.
The kids know today. You know what I mean? It may not be some of the, you know, the over 60 people, for example, who are not Black, who may not get some of the references, but the kids are pretty hip to what's going down.
That's what we feel. And the thing is,
they are hip.
You watch these shows and you just catch up, and you feel cool and smart if you don't need to catch up. And if you do need to catch up, you feel like, okay, I learned a little something. But, you know, it's what we all did when we were watching like old Bugs Bunny cartoons made in the 40s. And we had no idea what those references were, but we got it anyway. We got it, you know, laughed and understood enough of it to enjoy it. But so Yul and I had a, you know, sort of a game plan of being willing to do it kind of, you know, not necessarily have the glossiest finish on it if we could get control of it. And this is also monetarily. So I don't know, you want to talk about that a little bit more, but getting that back end money, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Because really, you know, one of the things that we are setting out to achieve, I was like, well, you know, quite frankly, how, even when we do get to sell an idea in the, let's say, the traditional model, there are, like you said, we get the pieces of something. What's going to happen in 2 years, right? And really what I'm interested in, and what we as a kind of behind the billboards and are interested in, kind of what we pitched to Maya, is like, well, we're interested in creating, you know, legacy money, or, and I mean, and it like, or at least in having, you know, part of it, having an idea, having control of an idea, and if it's an idea that you love, that can be, you know, it may not be always the usual route to market, but then it's a route to market that you still have some control over. Like, what does that merchandising, like the idea that we would just, you know, we've been developing already the merchandising for Feature X, and, you know, from everything from, well, I won't give it all away, but but that's already in, that's already in development. And, you know, we know what kind of, you know, we know what our Kaya doll is going to look like, and what young, you know, girls are going to dress up as in Halloween, Halloween a few years out. And those are the type of things. That's what I'm saying, that when you have, you know, there's two things you can do. You can either have the money to be kind of lazy and say, hey, they paid me off, or you can say, I'm going to take control of the idea and it doesn't matter, you know, and some of that does come with the luxury of being able to try to do that or attempt that. It's like, even if we try and fail, at least we know that we made the show that we wanted to make. It's a no excuses type of process. And that's something that was attractive to us.
Let me ask you a question. Just going back to the concept, because people are going to be asking me, how long do you usually like your pitches to be when you write it, and how long do you like it to be when you present it?
I always say as short and succinct as possible, and quite frankly, you know, I have been guilty in the past of them being too long. Right.
Yeah, too long is this is the thing that, I mean, I've been told, because I also have done pitches that are too long, that you really want to keep it, if you can, to like 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes.
It's the perfect time. I try to do 15 if I can.
Yeah.
But that's 20, you start to fall out a little bit.
But then you leave them time to ask questions, and you make sure that you don't answer all the questions in your pitch. And that's what I would normally do, is that it'd be so packed with information that no one have any questions at the end. And that's not a good thing, because you want them to have a, you know, to want to know more and to ask questions, and then you know what they're interested in. You know, oh, they care about this character, or oh, what they're really interested in is the theme, you know, or whatever. But it gives you a hint as to what their entry into this is, and how to get them to buy in more, because then you can elaborate on that.
Like, I actually stopped talking about what happens in season 2 and 3. I just talk about what happens. I just talk about what happens over season 1, and I leave them on a big hook, you know. And then, you know, however I decide to end it, I will slowly end it and come to an end. But I let them know that I have a whole show, because clearly it leads to what's going on in season 2. And now they're curious. So they wait a minute, what happens in season 2? And I go, oh yeah, we'll get to that. And and I'll just give them a little premise. Basically, season 2 is this. John's going to decide that this thing happens. He's going to kill his wife in the end. I mean, it's like, boom. You know what I mean? Really simple, just so they see that there's an arc there, that I have a whole thing, you know, and that's it.
I mean, what I've also found, at least recently, is what a lot of executives really want to hear is why you're passionate about it.
Yes.
Like, why are you doing this and not somebody else? And that was, again, something that was a problem when I was a younger writer, is that I would have all of these different ideas that I would pitch, but they would be ideas that executives just couldn't even imagine me writing. You know, either because my credits didn't match it, or and I would just say, like, hey, I'm interested in time travel, like that's what I'm into. But no matter what I said, they're looking at my credits and the fact that I'm a Black woman and thinking like, we just can't imagine this.
Yeah, this isn't Moesha.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of it.
And that is the pigeonhole that I think we've all, as creators, found ourselves so many times. That they're like, well, how can I imagine you doing this? You know, for me, I've traveled and lived all over the world, and so when I would talk about things internationally, people didn't really, they were like, what? They didn't quite get it. So at a certain point, I'd had it and just built the company around what my experience and what I do. So that has, you know, some of it just has to be on us, really, to go out and do. Now that's, you know, doesn't happen overnight, but you know, your experience and kind of leaning into your lived experience, you will have more success ultimately, I believe, when you are uncovering and being your you at the most, you know, it's the most valuable thing. But that's a hard lesson to learn, especially when you're trying to pay rent, et cetera.
So, you know. I mean, again, to some extent, it's what does Hollywood want you to be? You know, and so I came in, you know, like I started writing in the 80s. So now I actually think things are a little bit broader and they're looking for fresh voices and blah, blah, blah. When I was there, they weren't really looking for fresh.
No.
They were just looking for someone who was Black, who could be on this Black show that was being run by a white person.
Right.
And so that was me. So here I am, but I didn't get to really participate in the show other than to just, you know, do my job. And every once in a while, someone would say like, well, what do Black people eat? And I'd say, oh, spaghetti. That was not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear, you know, grits or something. So, you know, so I was like, so that was my career for a very long time. And honestly, I started writing children's novels for middle grade readers because I had all these ideas that no one was really letting me develop or write in television. So I have, several published books that are all of my failed, pilot ideas put into book form.
Well, it's IP though. It's IP, right?
Yeah.
So before we wrap this up, let me just ask you guys, what do you guys suggest to the writers out there who are, who want to get into animation, who want to sell their own series, what other, any tips or stuff you have?
Well, I would say that, find some artists that you like as well. If you're, sometimes they're one and the same, the storyteller and the visual artist. But it's one of the reasons that I've been coming and being on panels at Comic-Con. I have my AFROCOMICCON shirt, So for the past, few years, it's just because I've recognized that as a child who loved comic books and was, hoarding them, sometimes by probably not the right means of acquiring them when I was a kid, right? I was like, I really want that. I really want that comic.
Food or comic? Comic.
It's meeting your, going to the things to meet your heroes so that you can find those artists. And if you're an artist, find somebody that likes to tell stories or join up and start that conversation. Don't be afraid to start that conversation, and know that in starting that conversation that to build anything, you're going to want to add things as they go along. So you have to be open and collaborative, and that's a muscle that you can start without money, by the way. That's creativity is something that can be started and developed and learned. And then you try to reach out also to people like all of us up here on this panel. And I mean, I don't know, behindthebillboardsla.com. You can reach out, or development at Behind the Billboards.
Well, while you're there, you'll go ahead and give them your if you have your Twitter, Instagram, or whatever you have out there.
Oh, on Twitter, I'm at Yule Baby, and and then for Behind the Billboards, you can find us. We're behindthebillboardsla.com, and or for email, it's development@behindthebillboardsla.com. And I'm on I think at Yule Baby, probably on Twitter, Insta, a bunch of different things you can find us.
Same question for you, Maya. Any tips before?
I would say this is a really good time to be in animation, just because, like literally right now, it's one of the only things that can be produced during this pandemic. And I expect the pandemic to end, within maybe a year or certainly two, and animation actually takes a long time to develop and to make. So, I don't think that that's necessarily the reason why you should get into it, but it's a very rich field. It doesn't have a whole lot of Black people in it. And so those voices really need to come in. And if you're someone who is visually oriented, this is artwork in motion. It's a beautiful place. And the only thing that I would again mention is that if you are developing something, make sure the story is good. Like all the same things that you would be doing in any kind of, as a writer for movies or television or anything, you've really got to make sure that you've got an idea that you love, so that you're willing to spend a lot of time with it, that is not derivative, that it's your original voice, and then just do all that good development work. And then you can find the artist at that point and help develop it. But that it really does, all the important things about writing are present in animation as well. And sometimes you might watch something and say, like, that didn't have a story, but that's not what we're not aiming for that. We're not aiming for things like, I can do better than that. Don't aim for that. Aim for something higher.
And where can people find you, Maya, as we wrap up here?
Well, you can find me at, let's see, my Twitter is just Maya Williams at Maya Williams. And then I've got a website, mayawilliams.com. That's mainly for my books, but you can certainly reach me that way.
Sure.
And that's pretty much it. But my Facebook, I have a Facebook page, Maya Williams Author, AUTHOR. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Maya. Thank you, Yule. Again, everybody.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Hilliard.
Thank you, guys. I am Hilliard Guest. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram. I say Twitter like I'm cool, by the way. At Hilliard Guest. You guys can follow my Screenwriters Rant Room podcast. It's out there. The Writers Go podcast that I also co-host. And lots of good shit going on right now. One last thing. I have to repeat this for everybody at the end. Please consider donating to the Afro-Comic-Con Moonshot Junior program that funds young girls of color to go through a 12-month program where they will learn tech skills, innovation, product development, and entrepreneurship. Please click on the donation link. Any amount will help. More information on the website. So again, thank you to Hallie and Michael and the whole team over there. Norman, we appreciate you guys. Thank you. So
and look out for Future X.
Yeah.
Yes. Hopefully be on everyone's TV real soon.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Peace, everybody.
Yeah.
Peace.